This video shows how to hook up your AlphaPix controller to your pixels. Now, we're going to show you some general information. Consult with your vendor of your pixel lights to determine the exact details. The first thing we need to do is power up our controller. Now, what we want to do is we want to connect the power, and on the AlphaPix 16, it has two power inputs. This is power input 1 through 8, and this is 9 through 16. We do need to power up at minimum input number 1 through 8. And on the board, it is marked negative and positive. The negatives are in the center, and the positives are on the outsides. And you can see that we've hooked this up simply by unscrewing the cable here, and then putting the cable in, and then tightening it down appropriately. Please be sure not to over-tighten these connections. They do not need to be extremely tight. Okay, once we've got the controller hooked up, we're going to go ahead and turn off the power. Now that we've confirmed that it's up and working, and we're going to focus on actually connecting the pixels to the controller. So the first thing we need to do is to determine which output we're going to hook them up to. Now there are, in this particular case, 16 outputs. The AlphaPix 4 has 4, but they are marked identically, and we'll have at the top of the controller output SPI pixel output 1 right here, and then on the reverse side of every single output is also the label of exactly what wire does what. So we have ground, data, clock, and positive. And it'll also say output 1 on this side too, so you easily can figure out exactly where you are when you have a bunch of cables. Now, be aware that this may or may not, even if these plugs are interchangeable with other kinds of vendors' lights, note that you need to make sure that they are wired correctly. Okay, so we've already hooked up one string. Let's talk about the pixels themselves. Now, the first thing we need to do is determine the direction of the hookup. Pixels all have a direction. They need to be hooked up so that the data is flowing down the line. What happens is data comes down to the pixel, it's picked up and repeated on to the next pixel after it moves a little bit of data. So what's happening is the data is flowing from one pixel to the next, and it has to go in a specific order, and it can't go backwards. Now, how you identify which side is the input will vary based upon your string. There is no standard. Now, an example might be, in this particular case, we can see the PCB inside the pixel, and this pixel has an indicator saying DI for data input, and if we flip the pixel over, I can read in it that says DO for data out. Now, your pixel may have something different, or it may actually have an arrow. If your arrow is pointing this direction, this means that that's the flow of the data. You want the arrow to point away from your controller towards the end of your string. So if you're not sure, feel free to contact your vendor, or they may have included instructions with your pixels that also indicates that. We do that with all of our pixels. Check the included paperwork. Now, in this particular case, we've identified this is the side here, not the side with the chip on these particular 711 pixels, and we're going to need to be hooking this up to the input side. The next thing we need to do is identify the wires. Now, there is no standard for colors, so don't assume that red is positive, don't assume negative is black, or don't assume that white or yellow are data. There can be any combination of colors. You should never assume that just because one kind of pixel has one color, another pixel should be the same. Always verify your settings. If you're not sure, contact your vendor. Now, in these particular pixels, we can see inside the pixel that the red line is matched up with the 12 volt, and the data, or D line, is matched up with the white, and then the negative here, ground, G and D, is matched up with the blue wire. So we have positive in this particular case, data, and ground. So all pixels will have a minimum of 3 wires. It is possible that some pixels have 4 wires. So if you have a 4th wire in there, double check to make sure that that is not dumb RGB, because dumb RGBs also have 4 wires. But what you should see is an indication of data and clock, or DA or DATA, and then clock will be listed as CLK sometimes. So we've identified where we need to hook them up, and again, just to remember, the board itself actually lists what needs to be hooked up to what particular section of this connector. So we're going to go ahead and pull off this connector. This pluggable connector allows you to hook up the strings without having to hook them directly. This is useful if you wish to do testing, moving them around during testing, troubleshooting. If you want to hook them up off the controller and then plug them in at a later point. So all of these connectors are pluggable, except for the power inputs. And this also applies to the AlphaPix 4. So when these connectors come to you, they will be already pre-screwed. So you cannot just put the wire into them. You need to unscrew the wires first. But we only need to unscrew the specific wires that we need. So in this particular case, what I'm going to do is unscrew the positive and ground. So the ground here, we can see, is on this far side. I'm just going to open it up until I can see inside. I'm going to undo the positive, which is on the opposite side. So we know we definitely need to get the two outer sides. And then in this particular case, this connector with the screws on this side, it's ground, data, clock, positive. So in this particular case, we have WS2811, which all Holiday Coral Pixels currently are WS2811. And the clock wire is the second one, and the data wire is the third one. So we have a data wire. So we're going to go ahead and unscrew this. And we're going to take my pixels, which again, I've identified the colors. I know exactly what the wires mean. And I've identified that this is the proper input. I'm simply going to go ahead, double check. I need to put this just like this. So in this particular case, I can put them all in. It does help to also tin the wires by putting a little bit of solder on them. That'll often keep the little stray wires from popping into other spots. Now, word of caution that the data line, should you inject power into it, so for example, if you were to hook 12 volts up to where the clock or the data, the two wires in the center, it will short out the output chips. These are these chips that are located around the outside, two on this bank and then two on the other side. They are replaceable, but there's no need to replace them if they're not shorted out. So double check all your connections, look inside, make sure that we don't have any stray wires going from one over here to the other. Everything looks fine. And we've got the controller turned off, so we're going to go ahead and just plug it in here. And you can see that those match up to what I've already got here. I'm going to power up the controller. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead, and this is shown in another video, make sure that the controller is configured for use with that particular pixel, because each kind of pixel does have its own pixel protocol, such as 2811. So, see our other videos for additional setup information. This concludes the video on how to wire up your AlphaPix controller.